I'm a single daughter raising two parents, okay? And it is so tough raising parents in this generation. Because it's like, I understand that you're in your 50s, but you're not grown, okay? I need to know your whereabouts. I need to know where you're at.
For Mamma Mia, I'm your host, Ashani Dante. Welcome to But Are You Happy? The podcast that asks the questions you avoid in therapy.
And I'm Dr Anastasia Hronis, a clinical psychologist passionate about happiness and mental health. Are you in that stage of life where it's starting to feel like you are the parent to your parents? Maybe it's always been that way.
Yeah, is that normal?
Good question. Today, we're going to unpack parentification and how to recover when your parents have made you the mediator between them or put you in charge of holding on to their emotional baggage.
I know you're about to drop some gems, so let's get into it. Okay, Anastasia, I want to start this from the beginning. Is there even a clinical definition for being the parent for your parents?
So what we're talking about here is parentification. So this is the word I'll be referring back to throughout the podcast. So parentification is essentially when a child is required to take on the roles and responsibilities that we would typically expect a parent to do. So it's the child essentially being the parent for the parent.
I'm actually really excited about this topic because I don't know much about this term. I'm only learning about it now when we were preparing for this.
Yeah, and it's more common than you'd think. So there's a couple of different ways that the parentification can show up. So it can be practical parentification. Mm-hmm. So this is when a child or a teenager is practically required to contribute to the family and the household in ways that are beyond what we would expect to be age appropriate for a kid, right? So this might be that from a really young age, maybe like 12, 13, the child needs to get a job and they need to contribute financially to bills and things like that. Or they have to take on quite a significant role looking after their younger siblings, or they take a significant role in doing household chores and things like that. So there's that practical parentification that can exist.
Okay, so that's one type.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's the practical and then there's the emotional. So this presents very differently. This is where the child is expected to emotionally support the parents, again, in ways that are beyond what we would expect for a kid of that age. So this might be, for example, mum's going through a hard time, mum's really struggling with her mental health, and the child has this responsibility placed upon it to really be that emotional support for her, to listen to her struggles, to validate her, to be that ear who kind of sits and nods and hears her out, but also sort of provides reassurance and comfort. So it's where the child takes on that role of being emotionally the parent to the parent.
It's a really hard one because as you're talking through it, my curiosity leans more into what's the difference between you're wanting to teach your child responsibility versus actually let my child just be a child?
Yes. So the difference here is how much we rely on the child for those things, right? So there's a difference between going, hey, look, you're a teenager now. It might be good for you to get a job, earn some money, do some more chores around the house. Maybe we'll give you some pocket money, right? And that's with the goal of building skills for that young person versus relying on them. We need you to work because you need to contribute to the bills in this house, or we need you to do more chores because if you don't do them, they don't get done in this house, right? So it's the difference is the reliance on them.
So what are the consequences of parentification?
So there can be a lot of consequences, right? So it might be that if you've been a child who's been parentified, you might grow up suppressing your needs, right? Because in the family home, you didn't necessarily have the space to be a kid or the space to express your emotional needs and really have someone sit down with you and listen to those. So you might learn my needs are not as important as others, so I'm going to push them to the side and focus on other people. So we get this kind of suppression in adulthood. So that could be one kind of outcome or consequence of parentification. It might also be that someone ends up really stressed, right? It's a lot of a burden to carry all these things, practice practically and emotionally that we feel like we need to do for other people, to feel like we're holding that responsibility. And if we know about how the brain and the body work, the nervous system, if it's activated a lot at a young age, if a child is in a high state of stress when they're young, that's going to carry through in so many ways into adulthood. One of the other things we might find is that parentification for a kid interferes with their development. What I mean by this is that the kid never gets the opportunity to be a kid, right?
Yeah.
They don't get the opportunity to be a teenager and do the silly things that teenagers do, or go out to the parties, or, when they're in their 20s, kind of travel and have fun, right? They don't get the opportunities to progress through childhood, teenage, and early adult years in the way that we would expect. And so they miss out on some of these key experiences, but key learnings that come from those experiences. They become an adult way too fast. And what we can sometimes find is that later in life, there's resentment for that, or there can be that sense of, I never did those things as a kid or as a teenager, and I want to go back and do them now.
Yeah. And that's a hard place to be too when you're in that space of regret.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with parentification, why does it happen?
So many reasons. Ultimately, the parents who are caring for that child either don't have the capacity, or they're unable to in some way be the parents that they need to be themselves. They don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge, they maybe don't realize the best way to kind of parent their child. So we see this a lot in families where there is a parent or both parents who have mental health concerns and they're struggling in ways. We see this in families where there's addiction. So I see this a lot. I work with a lot of clients who have addictions, and the children end up being quite parentified. They have to take on a lot of the roles and responsibilities. They have to get themselves to school. They have to pack their lunches from a very young age. It might be the case where there's a lot of sort of family turmoil or divorce, that again, children are required to take on that role of being the listening ear and the comforter to the parents who are going through maybe a messy separation. There can be a lot of different reasons why it can occur, but rarely is it an intentional thing. It's usually because there's some sort of chaos, distress, lack of ability, lack of capacity amongst the parents.
And it's really interesting too, because it gets me reflecting just more specifically from a South Asian lens, right? Because I think there's this expectation that I've felt in a lot of my peers where it's like it's expected, like it's a cultural thing as well. And I guess it's a bit of a icky line, right? Because in our culture, it's all around, respecting the people that have walked before you, but then how do you maintain that sense of independence? So it is tricky to navigate.
Yes. It's that difference between you need to learn how to be responsible, you need to pack your own lunches for school. But if you didn't pack your lunch, I'm assuming mum or dad would sneak something into your bag or be like, okay, it was one day you learnt your lesson, but let's make sure you pack them from now on, as opposed to if that young kid doesn't pack their lunch, they're not eating that week.
Yeah, that's very different. So something I am curious about is the second wave of parentification, because the reality is, our parents are going to get older. We're naturally, as their children, going to fall into a caregiver role. How does one navigate that, especially if they have already been parentified in the past?
Yeah, becoming the parent for your parents when they age and they get old. It's a really tough one. And I think it really does require people to reflect on the relationship they've had with their parents throughout their life and how they perhaps want to care for them in those later stages of life as well. It really is a balancing act between what do I need at this point in my life? What are my priorities and responsibilities? And how can I also be there for my parents in some way? At times, it might mean setting certain boundaries. We can't do everything for them at all times, but it's about finding that balance for yourself that feels right.
It's funny that you said balance, because I feel like that's a common theme that we find in a lot of our episodes, because it really is at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So something I have been hearing more and more about, which I'm interested to get your take on, is parental alienation. What is it? Just in case for listeners that are tuning in that have no idea what that is.
Yeah, so when we talk about parental alienation, we're talking about a parent who essentially in some way tries to turn the child against the other parent. So we see this in families where there is either high conflict, there is potential separation and divorce, or again, if we have a parent maybe who is struggling with their mental health. So this might be things like trying to control the child's communication with the other parent, saying really negative things about them, trying to manipulate their perspective of the other parent, but in some ways trying to alienate them or damage the bonds that they have with the other parent. Now, for the child or the teenager on the receiving end of that, that can be really confusing because we are taught this message that our parents are good people. They look after us. They're there for us. We can go to them with anything and everything. But if we're suddenly getting a different message, which is your other parent is not a good person, here's all the bad things they do, all the bad things they've done, and you shouldn't talk to them, that's very destabilizing for a kid.
Have you seen that dynamic come up in the clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, when we do see sometimes kind of messy divorces and separations play out, children can sadly get caught up in that. So we really have to kind of work with parents to be like, you know what, you might have these negative feelings towards your ex-partner, but we really need to make sure that we don't bring those into the child's relationship with the parent.
How do we repair ourselves emotionally from something like parentification?
We have to be the parent to our own inner child. We reparent ourselves, right? So we've all got that little Anastasia, that little Ashani inside of us somewhere.
We
love them. But for some of us, for some of our listeners, those little versions of themselves haven't always felt that love and received that love. And so we can go through this process of what we call reparenting ourselves. So this is essentially giving that inner child within us the love, the care, the support, the validation, the encouragement that perhaps they never got as a child.
That's so beautiful.
Yes.
So what does that actually look like?
Yeah. So essentially, it's being able to comfort ourselves, love ourselves, give ourselves the opportunity to meet our own core emotional needs. Now, when I talk about core emotional needs, I'm talking about 5 core needs that we all have as children, as teenagers, as adults, as older adults. We have these 5 core emotional needs. So I'll go through them. First of all, we all have the need for secure attachment. I need to feel like I am securely bonded with other people, that I can have closeness with them and distance with them, and that attachment doesn't break. Okay? So we need secure attachment. We all need to feel like we have the opportunity for emotional expression and validation. I need to feel like I can tell the people in my life what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, how I'm going, and that they will hear that and validate it. That's the second one. Third one, we all have the need for competence, for a sense of autonomy in the world, for a sense of identity. I need to feel like I know who I am and that I feel confident in myself that I can get through life. Fourth one is we all have the need for limit setting. We need to be able to set limits on ourselves. When I go out into the lunchroom, I need to be able to not eat the whole cake. I need to just be able to eat one slice of cake, right?
Sounds relatable.
There's ability to set limits on ourselves. And then lastly, we all have the need for fun and play and spontaneity, right? When I picture this one, I imagine kind of kids running through the park, giggling, blowing bubbles, that real like free-spirited fun that we can lean into, okay? We all have these core emotional needs. Now, what happens with parentification is that some of these needs, these emotional needs, don't get met. So to go through the process of reparenting, we need to be able to identify, what didn't I get as a kid? What didn't I get enough of as a kid? And how can I give that to myself? So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a process as to how we can actually do this.
We love a good process. Guide us.
Okay. So first of all, get a picture in your mind of that younger version of yourself. If I imagine, say, little Anastasia, maybe kind of 6 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, whatever age feels right, imagine that younger version of yourself and ask yourself the question, what did little me not get? What was little me craving? What did little me really want? Did I really want to be seen? Did I really want to be praised? Did I really want to be hugged and comforted? Did I really want rest? Did I really want comfort and support? What did little me need? Now, if you can picture that younger version of you in your mind, close your eyes, see her, see him, see that little version of you, and imagine your adult self, you as you are right now, giving your younger self what they need. Give them that hug. Give them the encouragement. Give them the praise. Give them the time to sit with them and listen to them. Put your arm around them. Tell them they're special. Tell them they're worthy. Tell them they're valuable. Whatever it is that little you needed to hear, tell them that.
I personally love inner child work, but I think the question I have is, what happens if people can't access it? Because I've definitely had experiences where, I'm trying to connect to my little Ashani. She doesn't want to talk to me. She's like, what are you doing here? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, does it take time?
It takes time. Sometimes it's about imagining yourself at different ages as well. So maybe like 13-year-old us versus 5-year-old us will kind of respond quite differently. And if it feels really hard to hold that kind of empathy and compassion for yourself, pull out some photos from when you were young. Look at those baby photos. Look at those 6-year-old photos of you and imagine what little you was feeling, the good and the bad at that point in time. And lean into using those photos as an aid and a tool to access those compassionate feelings to your younger self.
I love that.
And the other thing I recommend for people sometimes is if you pull out that photo, if you can find yourself connecting with that younger version of you and you can tell her all the things she needs to hear, write it down in a letter and keep it somewhere. And even record yourself saying it onto your phone. Sometimes it can be a bit hard to listen to yourself back, but in those moments when you're then struggling as an adult, when you're feeling lonely, when you're feeling like your needs are not being met, pull out that letter and read it or listen to the audio recording of it to, again, in those adult moments, give yourself the love, the care, the validation, the appreciation that you need.
Oh, this is so beautiful. And I can imagine it being such a delicate process for people as well. So definitely try to add a bit of, light some candles, make it a really beautiful experience. I'm all about environment. So creating that beautiful space for you to step into. So is this kind of work actually going to help with breaking cycles? So we don't end up parentifying our future children if, people choose to have children.
Absolutely. I think a lot of parents wouldn't necessarily have even known what the term parentification was, right? They wouldn't have had the knowledge that this is not necessarily the right way to, or the best way to raise a child or to meet their emotional needs. Parenting has gone through lots of different phases throughout the years as to what the best way or the right way to parent is. And a lot of the time, parents may have been thinking, I'm doing the right thing by my child, teaching them to be responsible and independent and all that, but maybe it's gone too far. So absolutely, being able to do this inner work and reparent ourselves does break the cycle, and it gives us the insight and education as to how we might want to then parent our children as well.
We've reached that time in our episode where we answer a question or dilemma from one of you, our listeners. This dilemma comes from Deepa.
I'm studying at uni, juggling part-time work just to cover my rent and food, but my mum constantly asks me for money, often for her own bills, sometimes just because she's short. I feel guilty saying no, but it's getting harder to manage my own life. I'm trying to figure out adulthood, build a future, and enjoy some freedom, but I always feel pulled back. I don't want to resent her, but I'm exhausted and I don't have a lot of money to use on my own life, let alone hers. How do I set boundaries without feeling like a terrible daughter? I just want space to grow without carrying the weight of her world too.
Oh, that's so hard.
This is a tough one. I feel for you, Deepa. It's very hard to find that balance between wanting to do the right thing or the best thing by your family, by your parents, but also wanting to prioritize your own needs as well. So I would recommend, first of all, recognize your limits. We all have limits, whether they be emotional limits or whether they're sort of practical resource limits. We only have so much money, we only have so much time, we only have so much capacity. So start off by just really recognizing the limits that you have and that you can't be everything to mum. Reframe that guilt. You know, I heard you say you feel like you're going to be a terrible daughter, right? We want to just sort of reframe that guilt and be like, you're not a terrible daughter. The fact that you're asking us this question and tuning in and asking for help is 100% evidence that you are not a bad daughter and you are actually trying really hard to figure out how to navigate a tricky situation. In these situations, I personally don't think it's all just about setting boundaries, right? I know we're in a bit of a kind of boundary era at the moment. Everything's a boundary. Yes, boundaries are important, but sometimes just setting a boundary doesn't actually feel satisfying for a person. It's about finding the compromise, not just putting the boundary in place. And so what I might encourage you to do is perhaps have a conversation with mum and help her find other avenues to get her needs met. Are there community organizations? Are there services that can help her with some of the practical problems and challenges she's facing? Can she get financial assistance? Can she get financial counseling? And maybe you can help her navigate these services so you still feel like you're contributing, but you're not necessarily the one handing over the money. So think about what alternative ways you can find to still help mum without doing it for her.
And I really love that you've given Deepa the emotional but also really practical advice on how to approach it. Good luck, Deepa. We are cheering you on and you've got this. Anastasia, can you reiterate the main takeaways from today's episode?
First of all, parentification can happen for so many different reasons. Second, it can be extremely challenging for a young person or a child to take on responsibilities for their parents. Third, being parentified as a child can often mean that the child has some of their own emotional needs that go unmet. And last of all, as an adult, you can take steps to reparent your inner child through writing a letter, using words of comfort, or visualizations.